Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. See ebaymotors.com.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
This episode of the Gegenpressing Podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchup, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline. Better the game starts. Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manuel. Stefan not here today. He's busy with other things, but that's okay. Don't worry. He'll be back later this week. That's okay though, because I got Matt Ford with me and Seb Stafford-Bloor from The Athletic to talk a bunch of different topics. We got Köln relegation, avoidance madness. We got the Bayern coaching search, and we got the two promoted teams in the Bundesliga, St. Pauli and Holstein Kiel, as topics today. So lots to cover. But first of all, Matt, how's it going?
I'm
you doing
very well, thank you. I am good. Yeah. Get onto it in a sec, but I can tell you all about how I didn't go to the Cologne game. But it was great. But it was interesting anyway.
That's a story for itself, and we'll definitely get to that. And Seb, how's it going? How have you recovered from the St. Pauli promotion madness?
Not really, because I'm still a little bit sunburnt, Manu. It was a very, very hot day in Northern Europe, and it was amongst all the madness. My very, very pale white skin did not stand up.
Yikes. Okay, well, it's a beautiful day down here in Bavaria too. I got to tell you guys this before the show, but I actually biked to the Allianz Arena, which I thought was clever because that meant I could avoid the Deutsche Bahn. Which, Matt, let's start with you. I feel like I had the opposite experience of what you experienced on Saturday of you trying to get to the stadium. Before we talk about the craziness of what happened with Köln and them, let's be honest here, we thought they were done, right? And then them beating Union Berlin, coming back from 2-0 down. I think that game was almost as mad as your attempt to get to the stadium.
I mean, it wasn't a particularly mad attempt. I just got let down by my beloved Deutsche Bahn. But it's okay. Our relationship remains intact, remains one of mutual respect and appreciation. And all relationships go through tough times, and Deutsche Bahn knows that it let me down big time on Saturday. I was trying to get from Bonn up to Cologne. If anyone's aware of the geography, that's about a 15-minute train. It's effectively next door. And admittedly, this was nothing it wasn't Deutsche Bahn's fault, I suppose. Someone got injured. There was some sort of medical emergency somewhere on the line. So I hope whoever was involved is okay. But it meant there were no trains, and in the end, there was no chance of me making kickoff. But I thought, probably not missing out too much, particularly when Union quickly went 2 goals ahead. I thought, I need to go to a barbecue later anyway. So this has probably worked out for the best. Until the 87th minute. And get onto that in a sec, I suppose.
We do have to get onto that in a sec. I have to add that on Saturday I was at a wedding, and my brother-in-law is a massive Union Berlin fan. And for the first 87 minutes, him watching the game on the zone in the Bavarian countryside with everyone around him. He's born and raised in Berlin, East Berlin. So, he's already struggled with everyone being dressed in Dirndls and Lederhosen. For the first 87 minutes, he was okay, and then his face color changed into white. And the rest of the day wasn't that great for him, Matt. Why don't you talk us through what happened?
I mean, apart from the final 5 minutes, which I'll describe in a sec, it was very much it's the same club performance that we've seen in the past 5 or 6 games. Perhaps Darmstadt aside, that was a particularly negative exception. But apart from that, you've had Bochum, where they don't produce anything in the final thirds. That there's been a massive struggle all season, partly due to squad planning cuts, partly down to injury. But they're completely, FC Köln are completely toothless up front. It's quite sad to watch. I don't think anybody would accuse them of not trying. The support is very much on side. Even the local media landscape seems to be very much on side and understanding that this team is doing absolutely all it can. It simply can't. This was the case away at Mainz a couple of weeks ago. They even missed the first penalty before scoring the second, so they couldn't even put it away from the spot. The last home game, which I did manage to get to, where Deutsche Bahn didn't let me down, was the fantastic Freiburg game. Exhilarating 0-0 last week. And even then, it was a thought that should have been the weekend that FC Köln went down. They had to win that game against Freiburg. As they didn't, they were reliant on results on the Sunday going their way, which they then did. So they're very much given a stay of execution in this toothless, non-goal scoring purgatory that Cologne have found themselves in. So that execution was postponed until this weekend, where the thought was, well, this is the weekend where it happens because Cologne have to win. But Cologne don't win football matches, and you struggle to see, watching them, where's the goal going to come from? That they work it solidly enough through midfield, whether it's likes of Martel or Florian Kainz, Max Finkgräfer from the left adds little bits of impetus here and there. Farid Ali tries his hardest, tries to add some penetration, ends up stumbling over the ball half the time. Shots go flying off towards the corner flag or to row Z. There really is absolutely nothing until you bring on a completely unfit and injured Mark Uth, who admittedly you can tell by his movement and his control that he brings some quality, but he's absolutely not fit. Luca Waldschmidt is also out. Davis Elka has been out. There's the entire striking department is out injured. And out of nothing, Union take a 2-0 lead. And you think, well, that's it. FC have barely scored 3 goals in the past 5 or 6 games. They're not going to score 3 in 1. They get one back just before half time through a Florian Kainz penalty. Again, just like away at Mainz, it's the only way that FC score goals. And even after that, nothing really came in the second half. Lots of midfield possession, rather hopeless balls into the box, quite pathetic attempts to break Union down, really. It's quite sad to watch. And then, one deflection onto Stefan Tigges' head, and the ball's at the back of the net. Farid Ali gets on the left and gets the ball across to Damien Downs in injury time, and suddenly out of nothing, I can understand why your relative, your Berlin relative at that wedding was absolutely white in the face, because I think that was until that 88th minute, there was absolutely no sign in the world. I've never watched a football match where I thought a team was less likely to score 1 goal, let alone 2. It's absolutely unbelievable, but still leaves them with a mountain to climb. Literally, as we were talking about, climbing up that hill in Heidenheim. They literally have to climb up that hill in Heidenheim, they either win by 3 goals and hope that Union Berlin lose, or alternatively bring about, would we call it a 3-goal swing or a 4-goal swing? I'm not sure if my math is quite right, but a 4-goal swing. Yeah, so FC would have to win 3-0 while hoping that Union lose at least 1-0, or FC win 2-0, Union lose 2-0. Yeah, it's still very much an uphill battle. Union are at home. They have shown that they can score goals. They have these bizarre lapses in defensive concentration, but they have shown against in the past couple of games away at Cologne and at home to Bochum that they actually can score goals, more so than FC. It's it'd be a tough ask. I think that I would see the best hand being very much with Union Berlin. So how do you two see it?
Well, Seb, let's bring you in here. First of all, great to have you back on the show. It's been too long that the two of us have, I think, done something together. But let's talk about Union here, because the situation here is extremely tough. They fired Nenad Bielica. Reports in Germany indicated he would have been gone at the end of the season anyways. They pulled the trigger pretty much last week, right? They bring in the trifecta of coaches that they had in briefly after Urs Fischer left the club. When I look at them, I see a club spiraling out of control and getting into a situation where I personally think the relegation playoffs this year is not something that you want to face as a Bundesliga team, but they are now in a situation where it could very possibly end even worse.
Yeah, you're quite right about the relegation playoff, because I don't think anybody wants to be playing for Fortuna Düsseldorf. Not this team. They are really, really good. And obviously football has a habit of throwing out little ironies. And obviously Union being the last team to come up via that mechanism, potentially to be going down through it as well, would be, pretty horrible symmetry. I was looking, before we started recording, I had a quick look at Union's goals scored, and scored 31 goals all season. And so scoring, below a goal a game. They scored 7 in their first, I think, 2 or 3 games, which just shows how desperate it's been at the top of the pitch. And everywhere you look, actually, think about all the old tenets of what made them good under Urs Fischer and what allowed them to get up to the Champions League, or even just to establish themselves in the Bundesliga. They were so difficult to play against, Manu, everywhere. Like, trying to play balls into that penalty box, trying to get crosses into it, trying to win second balls in midfield. Like, everywhere you went, they competed. This season, it's been so loose. And to me, that's symptomatic of, I suppose there isn't really a word for it, but what happens when a group of players who perhaps are sort of a little bit underappreciated, and I'm thinking of players like Trimmel and Gieselman, players that got them into the Bundesliga in the first place. And then you make the quantum leap from that point, where you're an overachiever, to garnishing your squad with players who have possibly had already the best days of their career. Gessens is probably a good example of that, or Kevin Volland. And the result is this sort of weird chasm emotionally in your squad, where you don't really have a common cause anymore. And that's, for a club like Union, that is incredibly dangerous. And that feels like what's happening now. Can we honestly say that if Urs Fischer had stayed, it would be worse? I don't think so. It might not be better, but I don't think anything that has happened coaching-wise has had any real impact on the playing squad, which is terrifying if you're a Union fan.
I think he recognized that he wasn't able to coach this bunch.
Maybe. That's a fair point.
Right. What do you think, Matt?
I think one of the most remarkable things that I've heard in the past few weeks regarding Bielica at Union is his aversion to video analysis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Strange one. I've heard of an aversion in German coaching circles to laptop coaches, laptop trainers before, but rejecting video analysis altogether, at least according to reports, seems like a particularly strange one. I've not seen a lot of him up close. I've not seen a lot of Union up close. The one he made a very good impression on me. The last Union game that I was at, he ended up acting as a translator for Xavi Alonso for the Spanish press when Leverkusen played there, which I thought showed a really nice side to him. So I think he absolutely sort of sympathetic personality traits to him on that level. On the other hand, he did borderline assault Leroy Sané in his first or second game at Union. It's certainly an interesting character. I think the question is justified as to would things have been any worse under Urs Fischer? I suspect not. It's a really, really remarkable slide down the league, and I think I was just flicking through Kicker before, and they've pointed out that they conceded 4 goals against Bochum. I think that was against the, at that point, defensive worst away team in the division. And then a week after to concede 3 goals against Cologne, who have the most blunt attack in the league. It's remarkable how momentum can play that sort of role in football, both upwards and downwards in Union's case. Like I said, though, I saw just purely in terms of the mathematical constellation, I would still see them with a slightly more favourable hand on the final day.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the incident with Leroy Sané was a massive red flag, and I think I went on record on the podcast. I think Seb, you and I actually did that show together, and I said he should have been fired that day.
Yeah, and I agreed with you. I thought it was so unseemly, and it was just one of the ugliest things I've seen. And also, it was so at odds with a lot of the stuff that we've seen at Union Berlin over the last few years that it felt like such a departure from Urs Fischer, who, okay, not the most charismatic guy, not the most gregarious or outgoing, but there was a stability there that I think everybody responded to. And certainly, like that coaching analysis thing, hard to find a more meticulous coach than Fischer, which is, if a core group of players have grown used to one thing and then you replace it with something which is so contrasting, generally either goes very, very well or very, very badly. We know how that turned out. So I don't know. Like, I also, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because they almost left it too late. If you're going to make a coaching change, you have to commit in a different direction, because as things stand, you've got a playing staff there who quite a few of them would leave if they got relegated. The coaching changes were, again, promotions from within, as before. So there isn't necessarily a change of voice or a change of atmosphere, really. They've had these Bo Svensson rumours swelling around the club for a few weeks. And, Svensson's like kind of magnetic presence who could have potentially made an impact. I don't know whether he would have been reluctant to have taken the job before their security was assured. I'm sure probably not. And now actually there's suggestions that he might go and manage in Sunderland, which is pretty different from Union Berlin. So it feels like everywhere you look, there has been a bad decision taken, Manny.
Yeah.
This season. Everywhere.
Yeah, I went on a German podcast today, Bundesliga podcast, and I made the point that the entire roster construction was terrible. The fact that, they brought in Bonucci, Volland, Gosens, all good players, but not fitting to the system that they were playing. And they turned a squad of overachievers into a squad of underachievers. And the coaching decisions have been baffling as well. And I personally don't think relegation to the second division is the cleansing fire that it used to be for clubs. So I don't think it would do them any good to go down, because you might never see them again. But I do actually, Matt, you keep saying that they're in an advantageous position, but they have something to lose. Everyone else around them has something to win. Bochum made the coaching decision early, right? They were, for a while, looked like the team to get relegated. Köln have been dead man walking for weeks. They have nothing to lose on the final match day. Mainz have been on this insane trip with Bo Henriksen.
They made one of the great coaching decisions.
They made
a
great decision. 100%. I spoke to Bo Henriksen 3 weeks ago, and I know that article's up on the Substack, right? And I was ready to walk on or run to fire for him. It's
It's really interesting you say that, Manny, because I remember thinking exactly the same thing. I spoke to him a little bit, and you feel a little bit happier just for being in his presence.
Yeah, you do.
He's so positive and so full of energy that you couldn't help but think, if I was an out of tune, down on my luck footballer, I think I would feel pretty energized by being around this guy. And yeah, I mean, you can't argue this. Especially super impressive off the back of conceding 8 in Munich. To go on an unbeaten run like that is an amazing achievement of man management.
He said to me that was a good thing that happened. That actually helped him to tell his players that they weren't as good as they are.
I think that game in Munich, they've clearly taken the best out of that, and that was that Nadia Maybe free kick, which he just rattled in from about 40 yards out. So they've clearly focused on that. He's an impressive character. I've particularly enjoyed how he makes a point of sort of Jurgen Klopp style, going up to the fans during the warm up and before kickoff and getting them all riled up. Seems to have really generated a sense of belief around Mainz, and you could certainly tell that in the first 23 minutes against Dortmund on Saturday, where they completely blew them away. That was a team with solid momentum behind them. Ironically, I think I said a couple of weeks ago, after they hosted Cologne, I actually thought Cologne held up relatively well against them. Just toothless up front, but I think good work as so often in Mainz. One last thing I wanted to mention regarding Union though is that I think there's an interesting parallel, I think, between Union and Köln, in that they've both taken quite existential and identity changing decisions quite intentionally in the past 12 to 24 months. You've both touched on it a bit with Union, in that they made that decision last summer to bring in these rather non-Union Berlin players, and I think at the same time to make that decision to play the Champions League games in the Olympic Stadium rather than at home. I think we mentioned in a podcast a few months ago, or close to the time, that these were all little moves which mean a lot to a club like Union. Seb's just said it. Union are a club who, very much fed on that identification factor that they built up as a club over the years, and to make that clearly very conscious decision to make those departures in the transfer policy, bring in likes of Gosens and Volland and Bonucci and etc., to willingly go to the Olympic Stadium for financially understandable reasons. You can see why, but they didn't have to. UEFA regulations would have allowed them to play at home. We all saw the banners at the stadium. We need the air to first of eye, like the air to breathe, or words to those effects. And those decisions have clearly backfired. And there's no other way of saying that. Now, similarly in Cologne also made decisions, very conscious decisions in the past 12 to 24 months. Admittedly, decisions which were rather forced upon them, rather than having that willing choice to do so. But they suffered massively from the COVID pandemic. The only reason they managed to get through that pandemic was and afford to fund those two COVID seasons in 2020 or 2021 and 21-22 was by bringing forward sponsorship revenue and catering revenue and other revenue streams from 22-23 and 23-24 to finance those seasons, leaving them without sponsorship revenue in the past couple of years. The response to which has been they've had to cut the squad by a third, by the squad budget by a third. I spoke to the sporting director, managing sporting director Christian Keller, after the Freiburg game, the 0-0, whether that was a risk that was consciously taken. And they freely admit, yes, it was a gamble, it was a risk. We thought we could cut the squad budget for this reason, to financially stabilise the club, which they've done. FC Köln are profitable again. They're no longer in this existential threat. But it's come at the price of a squad which they thought could stay up, and is now coming very, 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 very close to not managing that. So I just think it's interesting how both of those clubs have, for one reason or the other, been forced into these really, really almost existential and identity-changing decisions, and neither of those gambles have as yet really paid off. Although we'll see come Saturday.
It's going to be fascinating. I want to talk about another club that has to make an existential decision. Hopefully, is going to be able to make one soon. We'll get to there in a second. But Matt, Seb, I'm going to put you on the spot. And before I put you on the spot, I'm going to put myself on the spot, and I'm going to predict who's going to go down and who's going to stay up. And I actually think that Union Berlin are going to be the team in the relegation playoffs. And Köln are going to go down. I think, though, it's going to be close. And I wouldn't be shocked if there is some sort of drama. What do you think, Matt?
As I said, the maths all speak for Union, and it's a shame because these are two fantastic football clubs. I don't want to see either Union Berlin or FC Köln go down. But as much as my head says that FC have got a massive mountain to climb, I can't live in this region and not be affected by the fortunes of FC Köln. And I speak for tens and tens and tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people in this region. I know it can annoy people outside of Cologne, but it's a key factor in the region's identity. People, the FC Köln means an awful lot to people, and it would be a massive shame to see them go down. So yes, FC. Hier wird nicht resigniert.
Seb, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Union find themselves in relegation, and I also think that they go down, because I think the truth of the Zweite Bundesliga season is that had it gone on for 6 more weeks, I think Fortuna probably go up automatically. They're playing so well, and this isn't like previous years where you had a kind of a broken heart valve limping into games against your resurgent Stuttgart, or that bizarre Felix Magath managed Hertha BSC. That was a very strange evening in Hamburg. This is a team loaded with talent, and Zolis is probably, I don't think it's controversial to say, he's probably the best player in the Zweite Bundesliga at the moment. But then, think of the other players there that are just playing right at the top of their form, for Mai and Appelkamp and Tanaka. That is a very, very dangerous team. And if you're low on morale and low on team chemistry, you do not want to be playing them. And I think it will cost Union, unfortunately. And I agree with Matt. I love going to watch football there, and I still will. But it would be a shame if they were not on the Bundesliga circuit. And Köln, I think, will go automatically, sadly, just because I don't think I don't think there's such a thing as a Frank Schmidt team being on the beach, really, is there? So I don't see them getting very much in Heidenheim, unfortunately.
Schmidt is not going to be there, right?
Sorry, not in Heidenheim. I fucked that bit entirely. Mainz are going to Heidenheim, aren't they?
That's okay. It happens. I made this mistake on a podcast earlier, so
no, you were right. FT. Wait, Heidenheim.
They are as well. This is that self-doubt that you've put into my head. You call me on a Monday night. I'm vulnerable and fragile. I've been kind of planning my way through weird UEFA bureaucracy around Euro 2024, and this is what happens.
Basically, they all play in red and white and have had terrible seasons. So
they're all playing really high. It's altitude everywhere you go, as we established.
Okay. Yeah, guys, let's stick with teams that still play in red and white. That's great transition. Although the fans made also a big protest note about playing in red and white. I'm sure, Matt, you're gonna write about this. You better do this week, because I want to talk about Bayern Munich. We're not gonna talk about the red jerseys, which are, I guess you already put us X-rated, Seb. So I'm just gonna say they got them awful. They were blindingly red. And red is actually, even though I'm an 1860 fan, red is my favorite color. That's too much red.
Are you allowed to support 1860 after saying something like that?
That was a really brave comment.
That you've kind of just sort of excommunicated yourself.
I was a red fire truck fan, okay?
Okay. Well, hey, save your excuses for people that that they're gonna. I don't know.
It took me years to come out of the closet with this. Okay. Anyways, that's too much red. You can't even see the numbers. Having said all that, we do need to talk about this pending coaching decision. Every day a new coach is getting circulated. The latest one was Flick. although he is no longer likely, which I think is hilarious because I've been told a while ago that that was never going to happen because the relationship between Bayern and Flick is too broken. And I don't think Eberl ever wanted him. Guys, I have a suspicion. And every time I talk to Max Eberl in the last... By the way, he's a sporting director who has the fantastic ability to do 3 interviews and say the exact same thing like a record player over and over again. It's really impressive. Mixed zone this week on Sunday, he was with Sky first, right? And then in the mixed zone at the Allianz Arena, they play the Sky interview, and then he comes to us, and the Sky interview is still playing, and the thing he said at the Sky interview, he kind of said 30-second delay, word for word to us again. And one of the things he keeps on saying is that the decision that Thomas Tuchel is no longer the head coach next season was made before his time. He's now said that 3 times to me in the last 10 days. I was asked what I make of the fact that Thomas Tuchel wasn't giving his goodbye flowers at the last game at the Allianz Arena. Personally, I don't think I make much of it. I think that the club decided collectively it wasn't the right moment to do so, and it usually doesn't happen for head coaches anyways. I think someone at Bayern said that usually head coaches get their goodbye flowers while they present the Meisterschaft, like it was the case with Jupp Heynckes, right, when he left the club and Pep Guardiola came in. It does lead to speculation, though, that maybe internally there is enough people now that want Tuchel to stay. There's enough players that want Tuchel to stay, right? There's a big group of players, in fact, that want him to stay. I sort of suspect Eberl wants Thomas Tuchel to stay. I'm not saying it's actually going to happen because, obviously this would be a really big reversal of everyone would have to jump over their own shadow. It wouldn't shock me at this point. But Seb, we're getting at this point now where they might not have a different choice.
There are very few options left, Manu.
Yeah.
I mean, logically, it would make a certain amount of sense for Tuchel to stay, but at the same time, from a sporting perspective, does it? Because what is the virtue of kicking this down the road for another year? Okay, the coaching market might improve, but as far as I understand it, Bayern's strategy is not even necessarily transition, it's overhaul. It is begin the build towards a new era, not just recapture the Bundesliga in a year's time. That's not really the objective. And so I don't really see how that fits with the kind of the notion of progress, unless I'm missing something. And respectfully to some of the players that want him to stay, well, some of those players are some of the players that the club want to move on. And so that's really, really awkward. And, it becomes a lot harder to do that if you haven't got someone who's willing to kind of oversee, or hasn't got the kind of the political heft to oversee that. I think it's no secret that that's kind of part of the reason behind the move towards Rangnick was you have an architect there who has a track record for skewing younger with recruitment and the way he constructs teams or the way he oversees the construction of teams. He's also someone who has the kind of gravitas to do the rebuilding and to deal with the kind of confrontations which inevitably occur when you try and move big, important, politically heavy pieces of a team, which is what has to happen. So how you manage those things with Tuchel still there, that's really, I can't see that.
Yeah, I actually thought there wasn't much that was interesting about the game on the weekend. I'm not going to lie. My full intention was to go to that game and hopefully do some pre-Champions League coverage, and obviously that didn't happen.
Did some cardio though. I mean,
cardio. I got the bike to the game, was great. I made I actually still managed to stay on my training plan, even though I went to work, which was awesome because that was the only way I was actually going to fit it in.
The lack of work you ended up doing.
But no, you know what? I am actually going to. My feature this week is on a few of the things that I noticed and a few things that I've been told. So stay tuned. I have some more thoughts on this, but there was one really notable thing to me, and that was starting 11 and the players on the bench. There was 2 18-year-olds on the bench. Svonarek started 19-year-old attacking midfielder, right? Pavlovic, okay, he's 20 now. Just as we are recording, called up for the Germany squad for Euro 2024.
Right decision that.
Right decision that, 100%.
Definitely.
I mean, I've said this a few times on this podcast already when I did my piece on Toni Kroos, who's statistically in the top 5 leagues, the best midfielder in Europe. The only reason why he trumped in that article that I did, trumped Alexander Pavlovic is because I used the cutoff line of at least 20 games played this season, right? But statistically speaking, they're almost identical, which is, so if you need a backup for Kroos and you're starting 11, Pavlovic is it, right? And so, yeah, he deserves it. And he was incredible again in this game. But Pavlovic wouldn't have played this sort of season without Thomas Tuchel. So this accusation that he isn't able to form young players, it's interesting that this final game, there were 4 guys on the field that were under 20.
I think we can assume that Thomas Tuchel knew what he was doing there.
Oh, 100%. 100% he knew what he was doing.
That was clearly a little message sent by carrier pigeon over to the Tegernsee.
100%.
One of the that's just one of the several conflicts of interest, I think, that Bayern have quite incredibly really got themselves caught up in now after the backs and forth over the past few weeks. Who has to say? Is are Max Eberl and Christoph Freund able to take on the authority and the responsibility of their roles and really bring about this overhaul, this final transition that Bayern so desperately need, or to what extent are De Heer, Hoeneß and Rummenigge still pulling the strings, and to what extent should that be the case or not? How does Thomas Tuchel fit into that into that constellation? Brought in with the massive support of Uli Hoeneß originally. Quite a lot was made about Thomas Tuchel saying, Uli, I'll look after your team, or I'll look after your Bayern, or whatever his words were. It all seemed quite harmonious. Certainly not the case now, given the messages flying back and forth. Then we've got the big issue. I don't think people are underestimating it, but this is again something that Bayern tie around their own necks. Really, the 2025 Champions League final. How do they combine those two? That is a massive conflict of interest for them. Do they want long-term, serious root and branch overhaul without Hoeneß and Rummenigge, with Eberl, Freund, and whoever they bring in as coach, whoever that might be? Because if that's the case, then you probably can't go demanding an appearance in the Champions League final in 1 year's time. Then again, we all know how massively important that is to them, particularly given what happened in 2012. Conflicts of interest all over the place at Bayern, and I have my opinion as to where it should go. In my opinion, you keep Tuchel. I think I've said before, I would very much like to see Max Eberl take control of this role, make that decision, and stamp his authority on the roles. The Tuchel decision was made before me. However, I'm now in charge and I'm reversing it. This is where we're going. Champions League final 2025 at home.
And I have the feeling he's massaging it. I have the feeling he's massaging us already in that direction. And when I was standing around with all the other journalists and the big guys from Bild, and also all those big name Bild reporters, and from the Tageszeitung and Abendzeitung and Merkur, and all these guys that form the opinion of the masses in Munich, there was a statistic that they blended in on Sky, and it showed that Thomas Tuchel's record this year is already better than Bayern's Munich overall record last season. And everyone's like, yeah, look, it's Tuchel. Like, look how well he's done. And he's probably the right coach. And you already read it in the newspapers. It's already kind of filtering in, right? Eberl has kind of managed to plant the seed a little bit. And I'm not saying Tuchel is going to be the guy, but I certainly sense Eberl would like to keep him.
Do you think Tuchel will go for that money? Sorry, Matt. Like, I just, to me, like, there's so much water under the bridge now. And the relationship, I just want to pick up on something Matt said, actually, because I think it's really, really important, in that if I'm a coach and I'm looking at that situation, I kind of want to know what the dimensions of this new structure actually are. Like, I want to see how Eberl and Freund work. I want to see where their authority ends and that of Hoeneß and Rummenigge begins again. Or who am I answerable to? How does the recruiting strategy work? Because Like, Bayern's a pretty high-profile place to fail or succeed, and I want to know on what terms I would be employed. And I think that's kind of one of the roots of their issues this summer, sorry, because what are you selling to people beyond we're Bayern Munich? This is our history. This is the kind of the heft of our place in the game. This is our first team. Like, how can you be for sure? How can you be certain how it's actually going to work from a coaching dynamic standpoint? I think that's kind of part of the problem. You want to watch it happen for a transfer window or two before you commit yourself to it.
Well, I think he would want a certain amount of influence, and he probably doesn't want to have a phone call from the Tegernsee every time a player that he wants doesn't come or he's not available or whatever, right? I think it's really interesting that Eberl or Tuchel said this post-game, that the decision to not have an official seeing off at the Allianz Arena was made together in a conversation that they had the day before. In their office, in Eberl's office, just the two of them. That is interesting, because that also indicates to me that there is a level of communication there that excludes other decision makers at the club.
That's good to hear. I think that's important, and I think that's the sort of stuff I've been reading into that as well. In a strange way, Thomas Tuchel, for the Bayern Munich head coach who has overseen the first failure to win the Bundesliga in 12 years, has actually found himself in a remarkably strong position. And in an odd way, though, the manner in which that Real Madrid semi-final ended, with the dubious offside call, the raised flag, the stoppage, the early whistle, has very much played to Thomas Tuchel's hands. He can very much now, quite legitimately as well, in a way, paint himself as this coach who has, since the first leg against Lazio, turned it around against them, then put into really solid and impressive performances against Arsenal, and everyone, Arsenal were at the very least joint favourites for life, if not slightly favoured, given the hype. And they certainly weren't favoured against Real Madrid. And we're generally okay. I think Tuchel comes out of it with his head held quite high and almost able to paint himself a little bit as the unfortunate victim of a refereeing error at the end, even though obviously we know that it wasn't quite as simple as that. It does seem to be going in that direction. I personally would think that would be a sensible way for Bayern to go, but that's up to me.
And I don't want to say by any means that that's how it's gonna go. I just think that that's how Eberl would like it to go, even though his hands might be bound in that regard, and the decision might no longer be his because of Tuchel, but also of other people at the club. My final point before we move on to the promoted teams is, if Bayern Munich want to win the Champions League, the best bet for them is Thomas Tuchel, because he knows how to do it. He knows how to get clubs deep. There's this Champions League run that Bayern Munich were on that got them within a whisker of reaching the final. Wouldn't have been possible without his tactics. That might mean they might not win the Bundesliga next year, because that's certainly possible too. But if the prize is the Champions League final in Munich, the guy in charge right now is the best bet. And we'll get to see how it's all going to play out. As I said, I'll have some more on this on the Substack, which is going to come out tomorrow. I'm switching spots for Stefan again because the quotes are fresh. We want to use them, right? So keep your eyes out on that. Seb, now let's get to the really great, exciting news. Hamburg will be back in the Bundesliga.
Not in quite the way Hamburg thought they would be, but there is now a professional football team from Hamburg playing first division football. Yes, you're correct.
And you were there. Talk us through it. It looked amazing. The photos that I've seen just looked incredible.
Yeah, it really was an amazing day. My wife is a St. Pauli fan, and we went down to the area quite early and just spent some time around the Reeperbahn and the bars, and it was it just had the most wonderful atmosphere. And I think I was saying to somebody else today, you don't often get the chance to be around happiness in football very often, and around joy. And it was a real privilege to see. I mean, it was kind of a safe promotion because I think very early on it became clear that Pauli were going up. They were going to win. They were clearly too strong for Oldenburg. And so it became a celebration. And in the bright sunshine, and there was actually a little bit behind the curtain, there was some Pauli employee next to me in the press box. And I looked over after about 65 minutes after Marcel Hartl had scored the third goal. And she was just gently crying. And just in a happy way. She was just, it was so loud. It was so happy. And I think it just was too much for her. And we had this big old hug. And it was just joy, right? To be close to joy. It's not my football team, but it was very lovely. And then the celebrations afterwards where, yeah, it all just came spilling out. And if you look very closely at some of the videos, just in the last few minutes before the game finishes, when the stewards close around the perimeter of the pitch to kind of head off the impending pitch invasion, you can actually see one of the stewards in a luminous jacket leading the chanting. So he wasn't that committed to preventing the pitch invasion, but it was a wonderful day. And I think if you go back to the Timo Schultz team, which just failed, who were autumn champions and who then lost Bergstoller and Curé in the summer transfer window, and Schultz obviously ended up losing his job. I think the story from that point until now is a great one, to place your faith in Hürzeler. Hürzeler sitting down with his core of leaders in the team and saying, look, I've had a chance to take a job. Do you want it? Are we together on this? Yes, we are. Really, from that moment onwards, not just this season, from that moment onwards, they've been absolutely brilliant. Long unbeaten runs. They didn't lose this season until February in any competition. And it's also really nice. I think one of the things that gets missed is with St. Pauli, because there's so much other stuff, is sometimes the kind of the detail within the football story can go missing. And I think if you look at the playing squad, there are all sorts of really interesting stories and individual successes. So, you know, someone like, some players like Jackson Irvine and Dapper Lion, of course, but someone like Alea Sad, who was playing fourth-tier football 18 months ago, is now a Tunisian international heading for the Bundesliga. You know, Eric Smith reinvented as this kind of almost like a ball-playing sweeper, really. You know, and it's kind of great. It's kind of great, and there are not many times in the job where, I mean, most of the time we're covering misery, right? We're just off the back of a 50-minute conversation about Bayern Munich and the politics and the awfulness and underperformance. There aren't many times you get to sit in the stadium and just think, God, this is pretty great. And Sunday was one of those. Definitely.
We also need to talk about Fabian Hürzeler. You know, I'm actually surprised, although maybe it's still going to happen, who knows, that his name hasn't been coming up at the Bayern Munich or Bayern Munich Sebener Straße, because he is, I know there's so much is made in the US press about him being born in Houston, Texas, and quote-unquote American, which is, of course, far from the truth.
Too much.
It's way too much. He's about as American as anyone on this podcast, which is not at all.
He has an affection. He certainly has an affection for America. And when I first met him, he clearly it was the place of his birth, yes. And I think they went on a lot of family holidays to America. I think his parents were both dentists.
I think it's really fair to say he's a Munich boy.
That's how he considers himself. When he talks about football, he's certainly Bavarian. He talks about kind of the influence of, Bayern Munich's need for the ball and desire to use the ball. That's kind of central to it, the way he thinks about the game. So, absolutely. He's not an American Nagelsmann. I think we'll then quash that.
I mean, we're really lucky that both you and I got to speak to him recently, right, in great length. And yeah, that's very much the impression I got. And I think it's really fascinating how pragmatic he is as a 31-year-old. You know, this idea of having to marry cultured football with the really pragmatic football that is played in the second division and being successful with it makes him such an intriguing head coach, which is really similar to Nagelsmann's first few months at Hoffenheim. We all don't really remember the fact that Nagelsmann had to endure the relegation battle with Hoffenheim before he got to be successful, right? I mean, I think he was 28, Hürzeler is 31, and to be so mature and being capable of sticking to both to the way you want to play football, but also being realistic enough that the reality at the moment is second division football and you need to be going up. I thought that was really impressive.
I mean, he's someone who really holds your attention. I first met him actually. He was 6 weeks into the job, and I wanted to interview him not because I expected great things. I just found it an interesting story, and in that kind of pathetic journalistic way, you think, oh, maybe I can hold my hand up and go, yeah, I knew, before anybody else did, which absolutely not the case. But he was so forthright in what he believed in, and so comfortable talking about detail within the game. And he even said then, about the marrying with his principles with the kind of the realities of second division football in Germany. He was talking about kind of the need to become secure at set pieces. And I remember the room in which we did it at St. Pauli's training ground. There was a sort of big flip chart with sort of a kind of a defensive formation facing, attacking throw-ins, and sort of like little bullet points about all the things that the players need to do. It's like pragmatism 101, right? And actually, if you look at this season, fewest goals conceded from set pieces in the Zweite Bundesliga, St. Pauli. Really, really solid football team with not a lot of remarkable individual players, I don't think. I don't think there's anybody there that you think, right, well, that player alone is going to carry you out of this league. But as a unit, as a collective, goodness, they're impressive. Yeah.
And I think that's going to make them really interesting next season, because they strike me sort of like a potential Heidenheim, right? Or an Union Berlin before they became whatever they are now. And that's also really similar to Holstein Kiel. Two players, Matt, that stick out to me here in this Holstein Kiel story is Louis Jan Veth, and the other one is Louis Holtby, the face of HSV's relegation, who is now going up with another northern team. Welcome Schleswig-Holstein to the Bundesliga. Even Saarland had 3 Bundesliga teams. You are now also a Bundesliga state or Land. But, this Holstein Kiel promotion, I remember I was at the relegation playoffs when they played Wolfsburg. That was in 2017, I think. 2018, thank you. So it's been a long time coming, let's be honest here. And this is a club that is so well run. Young head coach Raab comes from the Hoffenheim school as well. They are, this feels very similar to the St. Pauli story, that a long-term vision, pragmatic approach eventually got them there. And it also feels kind of like a happy end for someone like Louis Holtby, but also Jan Veth.
Yeah, there were a couple of jibes made from St. Pauli, weren't there? I believe in various interviews after the game about I think was it even Oka Gertlich himself, the president, who said that he was happy that Veth and Louis Holtby had finally found a club that they could go up with. So
I think Herzer said something similar. He was asked about that fight that happened before the derby the week before, and he was like, "Yeah, well, we won't have to worry about running around the Volkspark anytime soon."
Yeah.
Ouch.
Right. There are definitely a few jibes which certainly haven't gone unnoticed over at HSV. No, Holstein Kiel, yeah, fantastic story. I was also at those. Yeah, almost like the third attempt now that they've gone up almost. I was also at that first relegation playoff they had home and away against Wolfsburg in 2018. That came directly after promotion from the third division, so it would have been a direct double promotion all the way through if I memory serves correct. So they're very much underdogs going into that. I can't remember the exact figures, but of that Wolfsburg team. Had I believe that either that season or the season before, it must have been the season before, had actually beaten Manchester United and Real Madrid in the first leg.
That's right.
In the Champions League, only to find themselves about 12 months later in a relegation playoff against Holstein Kiel, who would effectively just come straight up from Division 3. So I made my way all the way up there in summer 2018. Which turned out to be fantastic timing. Now, if anyone can, I'm not sure how aware people are of the geography. Germany goes a lot further north than you actually think. I always underestimate. So even how far north Hamburg is, I tend to underestimate it. Kiel is another couple of 100 kilometers further north of that. You're getting towards Denmark. So obviously everything, the stereotype you have in your head is, sailors and ships and beach and the navy and that sort of thing. So
terrific bridge, by the way. There's a great canal bridge in Kiel.
So what did I see when I got off the bus in Kiel? The first thing I saw walking through town, 3 Holstein Kiel fans dressed as sailors in complete sailor uniform and hat. I just thought, this is ridiculous. Anyway, it turns out this I got talking to them, one of them, Frank, very, very proud Kieler. Took me up around the harbour, showed me some of the ships, which is equally poignant because this was in May, must have been 2018, getting on for almost exactly 100 years since the Kiel naval mutiny, which brought about the end of the First World War. That's where it all began. So there were all sorts of exhibitions going on and things to see. There were like museum exhibits, lots of history going on. And Holstein were in this playoff against Wolfsburg, and I think albeit a couple of goals down from the first leg. So it was a fantastic atmosphere in the city. So I really ended up developing a little bit of a soft spot for Holstein Kiel. A couple of years later, they reached another playoff, didn't they, against Cologne in that COVID season. And I think, didn't they even get a result in Cologne, or did they win in Cologne?
They won in Cologne and then got hammered.
They won in
at
Cologne,
home.
and then before getting hammered at home. So they have come close, and it's a result of steady work. I'm not going to claim to have followed Holstein Kiel particularly closely, but from what I read and hear, very, very solid work done. They steadily rebuilt the stadium, I think stand by stand, which is solid.
Still doesn't quite meet Bundesliga standards, though.
Does it not quite? So are they going to
they will have to have eine Sondergenehmigung.
Okay, 1 year special dispensation.
Sure.
So that'd be fun. But I believe the main stand is still very much as it was decades ago. So fantastic place to go and visit. And like St. Pauli, I think a genuine enrichment for the Bundesliga. Just quickly on St. Pauli. Obviously, I think there's a certain irony to it, isn't there? That they're coming up as the smaller Hamburg club in inverted commas. The stereotypical polar opposite to the over commercialization of the modern game, etc. Arguably with a much bigger commercial footprint and bigger commercial operation worldwide than half of the Bundesliga, if we're being honest. And I think it's a fascinating contrast, a fascinating irony, a fascinating paradox that St. Pauli have gone through, and it's been very much intentional under the president Orke Göttlich. And there's been one comment which has really stood out to me in the past couple of weeks, which he's repeated in a few chats with various people, that you can stand up for these values that St. Pauli do stand for. I mean, you can be left wing, you can be a bit alternative, you can be you can champion certain political causes, humanitarian causes, and yet simultaneously still be successful. You can do both, and I think that's a nice little message to take into next season, particularly in the football world that we live in, which is dominated by this. It is by its very nature uber capitalist, hyper capitalist at all costs, and that's not to say that you want to completely destroy the system, tear it all down. But I think having the presence of St. Pauli in there, who have found that balance between sticking to their values, but also running a highly professional, a highly competent footballing and commercial organisation, that those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And that's a really positive side for the Bundesliga in a year which is already positive. We've seen. I know we've obviously discussed Leverkusen, and they're not a complete fairy tale, but that's just solid work done. We've got Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League final. The Euros coming up. There's a slightly more positive feel around German football than there perhaps was a couple of years ago, and St. Pauli will only help that. So I think it's a That's a good move for all involved. I can't wait to get up there.
I think it's really interesting, and we probably need to talk about this when we get closer to the Euros, guys, about how different the mood is around German football now than it was even 8 months ago, because it does look, the Bundesliga looks in a really strong position, doesn't it? And the national team looks in an incredible strong position. All of a sudden, one of the favorites again to win the tournament. We would have thought that even a year ago. But, I also think, and to narrow in on St. Pauli, they're in a really good place at the moment. This is the first time in the club's history that they finished ahead of HSV in the standings, right? And what is really fascinating about this is they're in a place where that could become permanent. Because I think one thing that you can't underestimate about St. Pauli is their brand abroad is probably one of the strongest of all Bundesliga teams, period, especially in the United States, which, we talk about capitalism and all that sort of thing. Actually, the anti-capitalism, which is very capitalistic, in my opinion, is something that works really well in America. But I also think that, we've seen a similar thing with Union Berlin, although, again, they're doing a really good job right now trying to destroy it, where they kind of jumped ahead of Hertha, didn't they? I think in terms of members, they already have. Matt, you can correct me if that's wrong, but I think Union have more members than Hertha now.
I'm not getting into that debate anymore. I mean, it's very, very close, but trust me, don't dare go one way or the other on the internet with that.
Either very close or it's already happened. But my point is that St. Pauli are in a position now that if they do a good job in the Bundesliga and stay there, and maybe stay there for years, and HSV still struggle, Seb, they could become the number one team in Hamburg.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty strong proposition as well, Manu, because there's so much around the club that is saleable. In the sense that, so first and foremost, it's a wonderful place to watch football in Milan Tour. Like, it's a great ground. And it's one of those places where the atmosphere is everything that you'd want from a German football match, which is kind of very appealing to people from outside the country, of course. There's a lot to do in the city. There's a lot to do, depending on what your tastes are, in the St. Pauli district, obviously, coming just off the Reeperbahn. But it is like, I feel like they have now struck a balance which should allow this to happen. I spent some time with Öke Göttlich a few weeks ago, just ahead of their promotion, and he's not really afraid of that commercialism chat. He said, like, ultimately, if we want, and I'm paraphrasing here, if we want our views and our take on the world to have the biggest possible platform, we need a successful football team, or at least a successful football team helps that. And a successful football team is enabled by a strong commercial strategy. And he's very comfortable with those two things, standing together. And I think that's the kind of ambition that, I mean, it feels a little bit cruel to stamp on HSV this weekend of all, but essentially, yes, because HSV have become so big and so muddled and so non-distinctive, I think, because HSV don't really stand for anything. They're such a big club, and there's such a sort of a broad umbrella for people to gather under, that it's very, very difficult for people from outside Hamburg to really get a handle on who they are or what they represent, especially now, given that the sporting side of things has ebbed away. And so to go up against as you said, a side with an image which is truly global, whose messaging is incredibly strong, at a time when, in a lot of cases, it's very, very appropriate things to drive against sustainable kit production and some of the social pricing. I mean, if you're thinking about like some of the arguments around the Super League and some of the issues which afflict, I don't know, the Premier League, you've got a club saying, right, well, we're going to make some of the most desirable spots in our stadium among the cheapest to buy. That's a pretty good argument. That's a pretty good way of making sure that you're regenerating your fan base. You're actually making sure that young people can get in, which is something that I think football all across the world is not doing a good enough job of. Making sure that instead of worrying about, attention spans and TikTok and Instagram, you're saying, okay, are we making it achievable for someone to have a formative experience inside a football ground? Because that's the way people fall in love with the game, not, and I feel like St. Pauli get a lot of that stuff right. And I'm not a fan of the club, but my wife is. So that brings me close to it naturally. And there's a lot of people I've got to know in Hamburg through the club as a result of their fandom. And it's a very strong proposition.
Yeah. That's a great way, I think, of ending this podcast. First of all, congrats, St. Pauli. Congrats, Holstein Kiel. We're really looking forward to covering both those teams on the Gegenpressing Podcast next season. Obviously, we cover the second Bundesliga as well, but the Bundesliga gets the biggest focus, so we're really looking forward to that. As always, the show is brought to you by Bet Online. Matt, Seb, you both were fantastic. Really enjoyed this show. We'll be back with lots of more content this week. I'm sure, Matt, you're going to have a great roundup of the fan scene again on Wednesday or Thursday when it usually comes out. And my newsletter will be out tomorrow. And then Stefan's will take my place later this week. And yeah, we'll be back soon with more content. And until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.